Good morning. I appreciate everybody being on the line with us this morning to talk about secondary trauma and healing and self-care around the holidays. I appreciate you being here. As always, this webinar is being recorded and there will be a recorded version available for you, and I'll send that link out this afternoon when I send out certificates and follow-up resources. At any time during the webinar, if you have a question or concern, please feel free to let me know. You can just type it in your chat box and I'll be able to see as those things pop up. If you have any follow-up questions after the webinar or want any additional resources, you can always email me and let me know. My email is on the screen there. And yes, there are 2 H's, 2 R's, and 2 N's. Everybody, it is not a typo, so please make sure you get all those double letters in there or it won't come to me. And I also want to apologize in advance if you hear any knocking noises. There's some construction going on in our office building on the floor below us. You may hear some knocks and things this morning as we go along, but hopefully it won't be too bad. So let's go ahead and get started. We are talking about secondary trauma and healing and self-care this morning, which, as you all know, or I hope that you know, is one of the topics that is very important for all of us at the Coalition. We really want to make sure that all of us in this field, all of you folks who are working with survivors day in and day out, or working in victim services or working in first response, are taking care of yourselves every day. So we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning and what that can look like. So first, just to kind of mention, I guess sort of the elephant in the room now that we're almost to Hanukkah and Christmas, is holiday stress. And if you've ever gotten your time off for the holiday and immediately gotten sick, you know what that looks like, or feeling stressed out or feeling run down. There's a lot of reasons for that, and there is, research that shows that most folks actually feel more stressed out around the holidays than other times of year. And there are a lot of reasons for that. It's cold, there's more illnesses, you're getting to the end of your year, and there's that year-end fatigue, needing to recharge. This is also a time of year where many of us spend more money than normal. So money is very stressful. It's also a time of, as we're getting to the new year, it becomes a time of self-reflection and looking back and seeing, if we've met our goals for the year, if we're at a new point in the year. And sometimes that can be a really heavy and a really difficult thing to grapple with. There's also, some really increased expectations this time of year around family interactions and entertaining and gift giving and all of these obligations that we have that can put a lot of stress on us. So all of these things kind of come together to give us this extra bit of stress for the holidays, and makes it a lot harder for us. And then for those of us, I think particularly in this field or in victim services, we oftentimes see an increase of calls this time of year. And this year in particular, I think many of you all and many of our organizations and the Coalition as well are seeing an increased number of calls because we've got a lot of conversation about sexual assault in the media right now. And so that's kind of compounding the stress we may already feel. And then you have this idea of, getting some vacation and getting some time off, which is wonderful, but it can cause our work to pile up, which can be another stressor. So what can we do about that? And that's what I'm hoping to be able to talk to you about today, is how can we alleviate some of that pressure and some of that holiday stress? So sometimes we talk about self-care and we talk about it in this really sort of fluffy way where it's not substantial. It feels very performative. It feels very surface level. But the reality is that self-care is a crucial part of our functioning. Um, it's um, it's a part of our work is caring for ourselves. And if you become worn out, you lose focus, you're overworked, and once you hit a certain point of working too hard, you're not working efficiently. And that's why self-care is so crucial. It's so easy to neglect taking care of ourselves because we're busy and we're overwhelmed, and even a small reprieve feels like a luxury. So actually taking the time to eat lunch and not eat lunch at your desk, taking the time to exercise, taking the time to do something that we enjoy feels like selfishness or can feel like slacking off a little bit. But that mindset can really backfire on us. And there are three big realms where self-care helps us out. And I think, there are more than this, but these are three really big pieces. Self-care prevents burnout. And within our field, burnout is rampant, as I'm sure you all know. Turnover and burnout is an epidemic because the work that we do is really hard. It's really taxing and it's really challenging. So if we're not caring for ourselves, if we're letting that fester, then we are more likely to overload ourselves and more likely to burn out. Self-care reduces the overall negative effects of stress. A small amount of stress can serve a good purpose. Having deadlines, having challenge. Challenge is a good thing. But too much stress and stress that doesn't come with healing and with reprieve alongside it, starts to break down your mind and body. So taking care of yourself really means keeping your stress from taking over and making sure that you can function at full capacity because you're rejuvenating yourself. And self-care helps you recharge and refocus. Small breaks are sort of the epitome of self-care. Studies show that taking small little breaks during your day to recharge and stepping away from work actually makes you perform better. It increases productivity. So all of those are important pieces of self-care. And I think what many of us hear, and what is one of my favorite ways to think about self-care, is this idea of filling your cup, right? Because everybody is stressed out. No matter what your job is, your hours, your home life, there are always stressors, even if it's work that we love and has such a good purpose and is so important. There is always stress involved, and the stories that we hear and the challenges that we have to overcome in responding to violence is a huge stressor. And when we hear about self-care and when we read stories about self-care, you often hear about things like, oh, go take a bubble bath, go have a massage, go eat chocolate. And, as a fellow member of a profession where you can't just phone it in on a bad day, where you're going all the time, where your work is vital and important, we don't always have time for that, or money for that, or resources for that type of self-care. So what does self-care mean in our real lives, right? Self-care is about filling your own cup before it's empty so that you have enough to give to others, right? Because every day in our work with survivors, in our home lives, with our partners, with our children, with our families, with our friends, we are giving of parts of ourselves, whether it's, expertise, empathy, emotional energy, physical energy. We're giving of parts of ourselves to others to help lift them up and fill them up and give them joy and support. And if we're not refilling that well of energy, both emotionally and physically, we don't have that to give to others. That means, thinking of self-care as something that makes your life easier, not harder. Setting small goals, taking care of physical and mental health. And yes, it means having some fun once in a while, but that's not all that self-care is. And there's a reason that we call it practicing self-care, because it does take practice. It's about changing the way that you go about your day in order to take care of yourself, to fill your cup so that you can pour energy into the things that you love and the work that you do. So there are three main kind of umbrella types of self-care. There's the quick fix, right? You have to do self-care. So you go and drink a cup of tea, or you watch a YouTube video, or you take a bubble bath, or you get a massage. And it's these small things that you can do quickly throughout your day. Taking a walk, reading a few pages of a book, that can quickly kind of recharge and reset you. So it's what I was talking about when I mentioned those small, short breaks throughout your day. And just because it's a quick fix doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Doesn't mean it's the wrong way to do self-care, because these are things that are important, these small bits of recharging throughout our day. And then the second type, the type that we see, I think, most often in this field and in helping professions and victim service staff, is reactive self-care. This idea of putting a Band-Aid on something that's already broken, getting stressed out or burnt out, or having secondary trauma build up to the point that self-care is a reactive necessity. But when it gets to that point, it becomes very much like the image that you see on your screen, like putting a piece of duct tape over something that's already falling apart. So while reactive self-care can be a necessity, when we get to the point where we have no other choice and we have to do it, it is not the ideal, because it's not sustainable and it's not healing in the same way. So what I really want to encourage and really talk about today with the rest of our time together is this third type of self-care, which is self-investment. Because at the end of the day, your own biggest responsibility is yourself. And that is true for all of us, because whether we are married or single, whether we have children or we're childless, or whatever our responsibilities are, or whatever our work lives are, we cannot contribute our full energy and our full emotional strength and those full wells that we were talking about, those full cups, to those important responsibilities in our lives, if we don't take care of ourselves as well. And so part of being the best friend or the best mom or the best partner or the best employee that we can be, or just generally the best person, is caring for ourselves so that we have that emotional resilience to care for others. So self-care is self-kindness. And the more that we take time to be with ourselves and become self-aware, the more that we will be able to recognize when we need it. So how do we shift from quick fixes and reactive self-care to sort of a culture or a habit of self-investment? So I've got some ideas. Number one, think about self-care that makes things easier for you and not harder for you. Because I think for many of us, self-care feels like another chore for us to do, right? It's one more thing on our list that is already too full. And then it often becomes the thing that is either put on the back burner because we don't see it as vital, or it is the thing that stresses us out more because it's crammed into our already packed schedule. So there are things that are not the performative, fluffy idea of self-care that we usually hear about, that are ways to care for ourselves by making our lives easier. So that's things like prepping meals in advance. There are things like going to the doctor when you actually, for your regular checkups and when you start to feel sick, because it's preventative care, right? Giving yourself permission not to be perfect. So if you have this elaborate 5-course meal that you're planning for your friends over the holidays, give yourself permission to maybe order takeout. Give yourself a break. Take the time to honestly enjoy being around those folks that you love instead of being stressed out over a meal. Because when you're stressed out, everyone around you is stressed out. So look around and see the things that are not serving you well, the things that are more performative, like, wrapping every branch of every tree in your yard in Christmas lights, or cooking that elaborate meal. And how can you find places where that physical or emotional energy would be better used? Practicing good emotional hygiene. And so this is the idea of treating your emotions just like your emotional health, just like your physical health, and paying attention to when you're feeling down and when you're feeling drained and when you're feeling anxious. Thinking of activities that you can do daily to maintain your psychological health, just like brushing your teeth daily, just like thinking about eating good foods or exercising or whatever those things that you do to keep your physical health and hygiene up. Think of things that you can also implement into your routine that are mental health hygiene checks. So those are things like the small breaks throughout the day, or maybe stretching in the morning when you wake up, or maybe taking, 5 or 10 minutes a day to journal, or making sure that you're staying on top of taking your mental health medication if you're on medication, or maybe investing in, attending therapy appointments or seeing a counselor. Because, one of the things that, so my background and my education is actually in psychology and counseling. And one of the things that you first learn in those courses of study is that most psychologists, most counselors also seek therapy, because they're day in and day out hearing very difficult stories from their patients. And there's not a good outlet to release and debrief those. And that has to do with confidentiality and not wanting to burden other folks and maybe not having a sounding board readily available. But that is also true for folks in our field. We hear these difficult stories day in and day out, and we can't take it home with us, and we may not want to burden other folks. And having a good practice of mental health, whatever that looks like for you, however that feels right for you, is incredibly important. And the next piece of making self-care, part of your routine, part of your life, is protecting your schedule and practicing no. Many of us, I think, find ourselves working 50 or 60 hours a week, and we're stressed out and we're irritable and we're unfocused. And there's a study from Stanford University that has found that after about 50 hours a week, more or less, depending on the employee, productivity plummets. So if you're working yourself to the bone, you're not necessarily seeing the output that you want to see. And setting good boundaries in both our home and work lives. That's something that we talk about so much in trainings that I do with victim services agencies all across Tennessee. We talk about setting boundaries, setting boundaries between our clients and us, and showing those healthy boundaries and giving clients the opportunity to learn to say no and learn that they can set boundaries. But that's also true for us, setting boundaries for ourselves, reminding ourselves that when we're on vacation, we shouldn't be answering our emails. And when we're not on call, we shouldn't be answering work calls. And we shouldn't be, working 60 and 70 hours a week, because the productivity is just not there. And setting boundaries of what is realistic with your workload and communicating that in a healthy and respectful way. And here's some ideas, because I know that we all have heavy workloads, right? And I know that every one of us wants to do more and more and more, because we have such a desire and drive to help the clients that we're working with. But at the end of the day, if we are overwhelmed and overloaded, we are also doing our clients a disservice, because we can't give them the same high level of services and advocacy and interaction as we could if we had been honest and forthright and thoughtful about saying yes and saying no. And so here are some ideas to help you practice the art of no. Deferring. I'm swamped right now, but you can absolutely follow up. Or, I'm swamped right now, so I can't get to it today, but here is a reasonable timeline for when I can finish this thing. And part of that is having the foresight to really prioritize what is important and what maybe can wait a few days. And communicating with your supervisors and with your staff and with your team about what your team priorities and your organizational priorities are. I'm not qualified to do what you're asking, but here's someone who is, because the other thing that many of us have a really hard time doing, myself included, is saying no to something that's not really in our wheelhouse, because we feel like we have to do everything, and we feel like we have to say yes and keep pushing and keep working. So really recognizing and being able to say, you know what, that's not a strength of mine, but I know a resource for you that you can call, or I can get you connected with, or I can introduce you to. Because not only are you protecting your own boundaries and your own expertise and your own time, but for your colleague or client or whoever it is that you're referring out, you are referring them to a better, more qualified service for their need. And then the introduction. It's similar to the referral. This isn't in my wheelhouse, but I know someone who would be helpful. I can introduce you to them, or I can take you to them, or I can help you make that call or that email. And referrals are things that we do, I think, all the time with clients because we know that our organization can't do it all, and there are other community partners around us that have wonderful services that we refer to. But we forget to do that, I think, on a professional level sometimes as well. And the other piece of thinking about protecting your schedule and practicing no is creating a real-time schedule. If you keep a calendar, or if you keep a planner or an appointment book digitally or written, or however that looks for you, creating a real-time schedule, really, putting in there how long things take, including travel time, including the fact that that meeting at 3:00 is only supposed to take an hour, but Betty Sue is going to be in that meeting, and that whenever she's in a meeting, it goes over because, there's more talking and things get off track. So creating a real-time schedule that blocks off, I know that my meeting is from 1 to 2, but I have to drive there. So I have to block off 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after, and that is a real schedule. So being realistic about your time and what it takes. And also including self-care in your schedule. Instead of saying, it's something that I'll get to when I'm done with all of these things, actually penciling in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever it looks like for you, on your calendar and defending that time, blocking it out so that you don't overlap and overschedule yourself. And part of, again, protecting your time and your money is spending that time on the things that matter. This is the prioritizing. Learning to manage your time is another way to embrace self-care. And just like when you set a budget for your money, you can also set a budget for your time, and break out the things that you're spending time on and look back at your week and see how much time you spent working and how much time you spent with friends or with family, how much time you spent shopping, how much time you spent on self-care, whatever that looks like, and start budgeting that time for things that are priorities, whether that is work time, family time, and putting it on your calendar again, so that it gets done. And I think at the core of all of this, right, at the center of all of this self-care stuff, is recognizing that self-care is not a reward. It's a process. It's a piece of your life. Because so many of us use self-care as like, okay, well, I worked hard today, so I can have a brownie. We use self-care like it's a reward at the end of a race. But what self-care actually is those pit stops along the route of the race where you can get water and you can take a breather, and you can recharge yourself for a moment, right? Rewards can motivate us, Rewards are the light at the end of the tunnel. But the problem is that many of us consider basic comforts and basic care and basic mental and emotional health as a reward. And so we postpone taking care of ourselves until later, until it becomes crucial, until it becomes that reactive self-care that we were talking about earlier. So rewarding yourself with an indulgence is one thing, but using your basic comfort and mental health as a reward is really problematic. And sometimes we don't even realize that's what we're doing. For example, I know that I and a lot of you will postpone eating lunch even when you're hungry and your stomach is growling because you've got one more thing to work on and you don't want to stop and you don't want to look away. And at that point, we're starting to consider basic nourishment a reward. But the reality is, if we actually took time to refuel ourselves, then the work that we're doing would probably come a lot easier because we're re-energized, we're refueled, we're nourished. And so self-care is not always pretty. It's not always a treat or a reward. It's about getting really honest about the things that are important to you, the things that you value, the things that are good for you, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and including those things as priorities within your day, within your life. Self-care is self-love. It's tough love. And so it's hard things sometimes. You know, self-care is not just fun and happy. Self-care is remembering to take your medication every morning. Self-care is really taking a good hard look at the people you surround yourself with and not surrounding yourself with toxic people, even when it's hard and even when it means that you're cutting off a relationship that has been a long one. Self-care is about prioritizing your mental health and your emotional health so that those people you love and care about and those things that you love and care about, you'll have the energy to do and the energy to engage in. And self-care is hard work sometimes. And sometimes self-care is cleaning your kitchen because having a clean space feels better. Or taking out the trash because you need to do it, because it makes your space cleaner or feel better. Doing chores that you don't like doing, but at the end of the day, it's good for you. So self-care is not all those fluffy things. And self-care is not necessarily a brownie or a bubble bath, but it can be. But it's about prioritizing your health and your needs on many levels. But often we hear about performative self-care, right? We hear about those bubble baths and the chocolate and the rewards. But, you know, and I really love this quote. It's that true self-care is not salt baths and chocolate cake. It is making choice to build a life you don't regularly need to escape from. And that doesn't mean that you're not still going to need to recharge. And that doesn't mean you're not going to still need to prioritize your emotional health and your physical health. But when you've created self-care as part of your routine, when you've created self-care as part of your sustainability as a person, then all of those things can be built into your life and not, oh, an extra thing that I have to add on top. So self-care can be enforcing a morning routine. Self-care can be cooking healthy meals, meal planning. Self-care can be, forcing yourself to go into the gym, or telling a toxic friend that you don't want to see them anymore, or making a really stringent budget so that you can have a savings account, or, taking deliberate mandated breaks in your day that are built in to recharge yourself. And it can be basic things like taking a bath, or having some time where you turn your phone off, right? But at the end of the day, a world where self-care has to be a trendy thing is hard, because it means that we're a world that's not caring for itself. So self-care should not be something that we resort to because we're absolutely exhausted and we have no other choice because we know we finally have to do this thing. Self-care should be something that we integrate, that we think of as necessary, as an important piece of the building blocks of our lives. So I've got lots and lots of resources, and I will send you the resources with the link to the recording of this webinar, as well as your webinar certificate of attendance. But I would like to ask if anybody has any questions before we sign off. So if you do have a question, please go ahead and type it in your chat box, and I will do my very, very best to answer it. And if you don't have a question, then I'm going to tell you this. It is now 10:40 or 11:40 for those of you in East Tennessee. And I know that every one of you budgeted an hour for this webinar, because the webinars are always an hour. And so I'm going to challenge you. I am gifting you with 20 minutes to recharge and stretch and care for yourselves, and maybe write in some self-care into your calendar. So take this time, please, to practice some of what we've talked about this morning, and to recharge, and to start thinking about how you can make self-care an important and integrated part of your life. And it looks like we don't have any questions. So with that, I am going to sign off. I will email you all of the information this afternoon as soon as the recording has been updated. And I hope that you all have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your week, and get some rest. Bye.